Hey guys, Josh here. I got to sit down with Johnnemann Nordhagen of Dim Bulb Games to chat about Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, an indie game that you can find on Steam for $19.99. In this interview, we'll talk about what went into the game, the process, the writing, the soundtrack, and all that good stuff, and what inspired him as a gamer to make it, and whether or not we're going to be seeing it come up on any consoles here. So, without further ado, here is the interview.
Super BS. Super BS. Super BS. Super BS. Super BS. Super BS.
Guys, welcome to the Super BS Games Cast. I'm joined here by...
I'm Johnnemann Nordhagen, developer of Where the Water Tastes Like Wine.
Awesome, man. So I saw you at E3 last year, and you had a kind of a rough version of the game. I'm just curious, like, what was because I played the game, and it's a really cool game. I love the idea. What was the vision for that?
Thanks. Yeah. It sort of started, I was doing a lot of traveling after Gone Home and everything like that, the last game I shipped. And I was trying to think about what I wanted to make next. And out of that kind of traveling around, meeting people, hearing their stories and things like that, I decided that I wanted to try and bring that to game form. And so that's where the idea of the game kind of originated. And as you said, it was still in even rougher shape, even at E3 last year. It took a while to kind of find how you make a game out of traveling and telling stories.
Yeah, well, you did. It was interesting because, like, as I'm playing it, I'm noticing that you kind of blended. I guess text-based game, a text-based game with kind of a top-down, I don't want to say adventure, but kind of like a top-down style game where you're just moving from place to place. Was that something like you knew you wanted to do all along, or were you just trying different things and seeing what worked, what didn't?
That was actually something that from very early on I was aiming for. I was kind of trying to think like what genres of games might lend itself well to this idea, right? So, Gone Home was sort of like a first-person shooter, except you remove the shooting and you just have this storytelling narrative sort of thing going on. And so I was thinking like, okay, how can I do something like that except really capture this idea of traveling around, like discovering new places, meeting cool people, stuff like that. And a genre of game that I've always enjoyed was JRPGs. And, like the classic Final Fantasy VII,
Oh, yeah.
Final Fantasy VIII, things like that. They have this overworld map, right, where everything is visible to you, and you can wander around and you get this feeling of like you're crossing continents and all this sort of stuff, except it's way out of scale. It's not like realistic 3D gameplay or anything like that. You're not occupying a real space. And so I thought, that feels a lot like what I want. And so what I'm going to do is take that concept, except instead of this fantasy land that you're wandering around, it's going to be the United States. And so you're going to be roaming this 3D landscape. And then originally the stories you get were like random encounter sort of things, that would happen to you, kind of like enemy attacks in a JRPG. And then the characters were sort of like the boss battle version of that, I guess, in a way. And that obviously changed a lot from that original conception, but that's where a lot of those ideas came from, was, that kind of trying to fit that model a little bit.
I kind of like the idea, like what you had in the end product. I kind of like that better than the idea of having just random encounters with people, because when you first get put onto this map, it's huge and it's almost like overwhelming, but at the same time, because when I play video games, I got like mad OCD. Like anytime I'm on Assassin's Creed game and I see like little dots on the map, I got to go check everything out. With this,
me too.
yeah, it's a curse, man. But with this, like you get out and like it doesn't feel like I need to go like check everything out, but at the same time, I want to. Like I as soon as I got done talking to the wolf guy, I was out there. And, there's buildings to the left, buildings to the right, and I saw that the path was branching off in different directions, and I wanted to explore, like, every inch of this path, but I had to pick one, and that was a really difficult decision for me, but, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, first choice in the game.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's definitely, I think that in order to give, because part of what I also wanted was this joy of, like, exploration, right? Like, discovering new things and everything like that, and because that's an interesting part of traveling. When you're traveling, like, you're doing it to see new stuff, to things that you haven't seen before. And so part of that, I think, was giving people destinations and things that they could see on the horizon and say, like, oh, look, there's something, I know something interesting will happen over there. I'm headed there. And the random encounter thing that we had at one point was frustrating more than anything else, because you'd be trying to go someplace and then all of a sudden you'd get like something coming up and it would be like, do I want to engage with this or not? I kind of have to, it's interrupting me rather than like me choosing to go do this thing right now, which I think is a much better model, especially for the kind of game we were trying to make.
Okay, so this might be a weird question, but when you encounter these people, you go to these different places, I liked how you had it. They tell a story and you get to make a decision. Was any of that kind of inspired by those old pick your own adventure novels from the 90s?
Not exactly that, but definitely like the tradition of interactive fiction kind of games, the very like heavy text-based games, things like 80 Days. I don't know if you've played that. Sunless Sea, like there's a bunch of cool games that are out right now that kind of follow that same model, and originally when I was first starting the game, I wanted it to be pretty easy to make, and doing it with text helped a lot with that. Text is cheap and you can iterate on it quickly, and you can make really compelling stories that way. And so yeah, that's kind of where that comes from.
Well, it's cool that you made the text sort of like interactive, because I'm playing a game right now on the Nintendo Switch called Lost Sphere, and the text just is endless on that game. So like yeah. So
yeah, I think that we definitely found that you need that, is like if you're going to be asking the player to read a bunch of stuff, you have to give them some choices through that and some interaction, like some feeling of like participating in the story, not just dumping a whole bunch of text in you. Otherwise it becomes like, you're in Skyrim and you pick up one of those books or whatever, and it's just like, why am I sitting here reading a book in a video game? It doesn't feel very good. So
yeah, but I mean, good for them for like crafting their own like mythology within their game. Whether or not people actually read it, that's another.
Yeah, no kidding. No, that game has lore coming out his ears. It's amazing.
So back to the text. One of the first stories I came upon was a guy on a telephone wire, and you get to pick whether you want to keep walking, or you can take the bottle that he has on his belt that he left on the ground or something. And so I don't know, like for some reason I thought that if I picked up the bottle, because there's a bird around the guy, and I thought if I picked up the bottle I was going to throw it at the bird, but it ended up I was stealing his booze, and he was trying to stop me, and he fell off of the telephone wire, and that was a moment where I was like, oh crap. So the choices you make have a legitimate outcome on the characters that the stories are about. Was that planned? Does that have like the overarching game? Does that have a big effect on the way things end up?
It doesn't really have an effect on the way things end up, like as far as your story goes. It's more about the stories that you collect. Like that story changes what type it is depending on whether you do that or not, and whether it's a story about death or not, and if you do that and he falls and plummets to his death, then you now have a kind of creepy story to tell about this guy, this lineman, this drunken lineman that fell to his death. And if you don't do that, you have a different, sadder story to tell. But yeah, that's the way that works out. It's really more about the stories that you get out of it as a character.
Yeah, it was cool because I was, from that moment forward, I was trying to be very careful in my dialogue selections. So that was a pretty cool aspect of the game. One thing that was cool, it like stuck out to me. It kind of captured that like Romy feeling, was the music. What What can you tell me a little bit about the music and the process of picking or creating it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the game is very much based on music, like on American roots music, folk and bluegrass and blues and stuff like that. From the very beginning, I knew that that was something that I wanted to bring in there. Something I'm interested in. I love music, and I love that kind of music. And even the title of the game, "Where the Water Tastes Like Wine," it comes from a song. It comes from a folk song, and so bringing in that kind of music was really important. And what we did was I got a composer. His name's Ryan Ike, and we worked together to make songs that sound like they are, from that tradition without actually being, those folk songs or whatever. But he did an amazing job. One of the coolest things about the music, I don't know if you noticed this or not, but as you move from place to place, you hear the same song. It's called Vagrant Song, but it changes its character depending on where you go. So like in the Northeast, it's kind of this Appalachian bluegrass version of the song. In the South, it's more bluesy. In the Midwest, you get this Midwestern folk. And in the Southwest, it uses Spanish lyrics and sort of a Mexican-American beat and rhythm behind it and everything like that. And so it kind of tries to reflect the changing culture and folk roots of each different part of America as you go through there.
That's cool because a lot of people don't realize that there is like drastic change from place to place. Like going into like the Midwest, everything is so much different. The dialect of the people, the things that they like, the foods, that's really cool. I like that. I'm just curious, like as an indie developer, like when your game came out, were you anxious to see like all the reviews from the different outlets that were playing the game?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. I mean, that's a big thing is to see. I mean, we spent almost 4 years making this game, and it's really terrifying. It's like, you're making this thing and you're putting it out there and you're basically telling everyone, hey, judge me, like you contact all these press outlets and you send them press keys, and that's all you can do. And like, you're just saying, here's my baby, tell me how beautiful it is. And sometimes they think your baby's ugly, and that's really hard, getting your stuff judged is tough.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, it's like any creative project creates this level of like vulnerability in you, and it's hard to have someone not like it, but at the same time you're like, it's kind of decent feedback.
Yeah, definitely.
But I mean, for the most part, it's been scoring pretty well. How does that feel for you? Like I know, it's kind of not a lot of people know about it. So it's, as word gets out, I hope that it sells a lot more because it's a really interesting game. But I mean, for the most part, the feedback that I've read has been pretty positive. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, and I think that one thing that we kind of knew we were doing from the beginning was making a game that it's very much not a traditional game. Like when people ask me, oh, what genre is it? Like, it's really hard to answer that question. I don't really know, but we hoped from the very beginning that it would be a game that would appeal to people who aren't traditional gamers either, people who like their story games, who like hearing stories, who like American history, who like folklore and all that sort of stuff. And so it's been really nice to see that like the mainstream press has really, really been into the game. Like they love it. Like all the outlets that reviewed it who are not games press really like it. And then the games press is sort of divided. It's been really nice to see. Like some people love the game, which is amazing to see, and that's fantastic. Other people struggled with it a bit, and I think that's absolutely what we expected because it's again, it is a weird game. It's not your normal game.
Right. Well, I mean, even because the game, your game was on, they're talked about on IGN and Polygon, and like just having any game on those sites that scores above a 5 is going to get some kind of interest in it. So that's, I guess the good thing about those type of websites.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really fantastic. And I'm super glad that we got all of that attention. You know, it was way more than like any indie could reasonably hope to get in this day and age. So it was really gratifying to see that, and I'm super happy. And I hope that there are more conversations about the game going forward too. You know, not just like the review sort of thing, but people talking about the ideas in the game and engaging with like, what is this game trying to say? What does it mean? Like, what are these characters doing? And I mean, one of the interesting things about the game is that like we got different people to write each of these different characters, right? So it's like a collection of short stories in video game form. And so I think I really want to see people look at like, is this person saying something slightly different than this person, even though they're talking about the same themes, you know, stuff like that. So yeah, we'll see.
That's interesting to me. I had read that you guys got a bunch of like I don't know if they're indie writers or just a bunch of people who like to write to put this project together. What was that process like? Did you get them all in a room, or did you contact them separately and kind of explain the vision? Were there some revisions had to be done on some of the stories you received?
Yeah, it was definitely very much a separate thing. It was. I don't know, kind of weird actually, but I went around and I started asking people that I knew first and that I admired their writing and stuff like that. And I was like, hey, do you want to write for this game? And once I got a few people like that on board and they had written their characters, and I was able to go to other people and ask them, you know, but each person wrote totally individually. Like they got to see some of the stuff that previous people had written, but they didn't talk to each other or anything like that, or at least not that I know of. I didn't prevent them from talking to each other, but, you know, it wasn't like a writer's room or something like that where everyone was working together. It was very much like, I want you to write this character, you know, by yourself and whatever. And yeah, it's a really interesting collection of people. Like there's a few people who have never written for games before, never written anything much before, who kind of just starting out in their careers, and this is their first thing. And then there's also some folks who are fantastic writers, but kind of outside video games, and this is their first time into video games. And then there's a few people who are like video games journalists, you know, who have written about games for a long time and are like starting to get into that, like people like Lee Alexander and Kara Ellison, you know, who used to be big journalists and are now doing their own stories and so on. And then there's like the actual professional AAA game writers, you know, people like Jolie Menzel and Ann Toole, you know, who wrote for South Park and The Witcher, respectively, you know. So it's like it's a whole spectrum of different kinds of writers working on the game.
That's cool because you can kind of like in the stories that you come across in the game are so drastically different from each other. So I thought that was a really cool element of the game. Did you get any like stories that you had to throw out or you had to change at all?
Not really. Most of the character writers did a really spectacular job meeting what happened. We had to change everything a bunch just because the game changed. So originally, like when I first started contacting people to ask them to write this, the way the game played was you had a collection of tarot cards that you gathered over time, you know, by having things, you'd sometimes get cards from them. And when you were talking to people, what you would do is you'd play a card and you would play like, you know, the devil or something like that. And then the person that would act kind of like a question, and the person would then tell you how they felt about, you know, that subject. But we actually changed it to in the final game so that you're actually collecting stories and telling those instead, and they fit into the same categories that the cards did, but it's a very different way of approaching it. And so we had to add a bunch of stuff for that and revise it. But that wasn't anyone that we had to like, there wasn't anything that we had to throw out or anything like that. You know, all the stories got edited, of course. They all got feedback and they, you know, were revised and so on. But it wasn't, everyone turned in great stuff.
Good. Well, I know you did have the tarot cards in the beginning, right? Where you were picking, you're telling the wolf guy stories and you're kind of picking like what type of story it was going to be. And he's telling you all these things. It could be a story about death or a story about luck or whatever. So that, you know, did you like the idea and you just wanted to kind of keep it in there?
Yeah, it's a really good categorization idea, I think, is like, because tarot cards, they have meaning, but it's sort of an amorphous meaning, right? Like, you know, you get the Tower card and it can mean like death and destruction and stuff like that. It can also mean like upheaval or sudden change, extreme change. It can mean all sorts of things around that, and they're all similar, but there's a range of meaning there. And so if you have a story and it's a story about death, you can file it under there. But if it's a story about like big upheaval of some kind, like a civil war, or someone even just changing their mind, extremely, or things like that, you can also put that under there. So it's a really good device for categorizing stories, which don't often fit into nice, neat little boxes.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about video games is that it's such a unique medium for storytelling, but then you also kind of mixed in those types of elements as well as different stories from different people. So you kind of like hit the storytelling nail right on the head there.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope so.
Well, so you were talking about the development process a little bit ago. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So it started basically, it was just me. I began the game, and I sort of started with an idea of what I wanted to do and some ideas of how it might happen. And I tried some different prototypes for things. The thing that I was really interested in to start with was like, how do you capture telling a story in a game, right? Like the act of sitting around telling stories, like how do you do that? And I came up with a few different ideas for that. And none of them really worked out very well for this game. Like they might have worked out for other games. The one that got the furthest along was sort of like a Mad Libs style prototype where you'd have adventures and meet people and hear stories, and those would go into sort of like story component pieces, and then when you were telling a story, if you needed like an adjective or something, all the adjectives that you had would be like swirling around there, and you'd have to choose one within a certain amount of time. And so you sort of like build this story in real time about like what had been happening to you. And if you waited too long to fill in a word, you'd start saying like, things like that, and people would like the story less because you were doing it less well.
Like timed Mad Libs?
It was actually really cool, and I'd like to pursue that idea a little bit more later. But what it ended up with is just like Mad Libs, like it ends up with sort of like very goofy sounding stories in the end, right? You just fit in like random things into the slot, and the story turns out being like, I don't know, I saw a purple hot dog flying in Utah, sort of thing. And like that works for some things, but it didn't work for this game that's supposed to be like sad and deep and like raise questions about America and things like that, and that sort of goofy model didn't work. So what I eventually did was sort of just go back to this idea that the storytelling isn't the important part, the gathering stories and the spreading of stories is the important part. So the act of telling sort of just happens, but the collecting and everything is the important part. But anyway, going back to development, sorry, got on a little bit of a tangent there.
No worries,
but, the first person that I brought on to help was Kellen Jett, who's the illustrator who kind of like defined the style for the game. So all the way the characters look, all the the sort of very strong black line art, that's all his style, and he really did a fantastic job defining that. And then I started contacting writers and getting them to write stories. I reached out to Ryan, the composer, and got him on board to write music. And it kind of all just snowballed from there and grew into this big project that was bigger than I intended it to be when I started. And eventually we decided that we'd been getting a lot of feedback that people really wanted voice acting in the game, that they thought that would really sell it, and we couldn't afford to do that on our own. So I started reaching out to publishers and eventually signed a deal with Good Shepherd, who published the game, and they got voice acting to happen. They did QA, localization, all this great sort of behind the scenes stuff that you need to have a game work out.
The preliminary stages before you found a publisher, did you pay for it out of your own money, or did you do any crowdfunding for it? how did that
No,
go
it was just
down?
all self-funded. Yep, I just paid for it out of my own pocket.
Brave man.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
Hey, well, I mean, it like I said, man. In the end, the product looks really good. So that's
Yeah, I think it turned out really well. I'm very, very proud of the game. It's a fantastic achievement.
so. I just real quick want to ask you about the marketing of the game itself, because I know you're probably up to speed on all like the indie games coming out. Whether on Steam, Nintendo Switch, Xbox, PlayStation. There's a lot of indie games. There's someone was saying there's like 18 indie games being released a week on the Switch. What was the marketing like for your game? How did you get it noticed by people, or get the hype train rolling on that?
Yeah, so we were really lucky in that we started very early on. We started to get noticed by the press and by sort of shows and awards people and things like that. So we actually premiered before we even really knew exactly what the game was, except that it was about telling stories and these different characters and everything like that. We were asked to do a premiere trailer at the Game Awards in 2015, I think, is when that actually ended up happening. I think we were asked in 2014 and we didn't have it ready. But so, we got to show off this awesome teaser trailer of, just show what the game might feel like not what it plays like or anything like that, but just sort of an idea of like, this is weird, mysterious Americana. We've got trains, we've got different landscapes, we've got the tarot cards in there, we have this magical transformation thing happening. So we were able to do all that very early on. Stuff like the Games Awards, we got covered by press out of that and previously. And then we started getting up we got invited to shows, we got up for various awards. We went to Day of the Devs and South by Southwest and E3 where we met, Indiecade, we got a IGF nomination, we got all this sort of critical attention, and that really helps boost the profile of a game because, you get to start seeing it all over the place in press and everything. One other thing that we did, which was came from the publisher Good Shepherd, is when we started doing voice acting, we actually somehow got the musician Sting to voice act the game for us. So he plays the wolf character, and he's in there doing that, and that's sort of that. Obviously, when we announced that was a really big deal. A lot of press covered that because how could you not? It's a very weird thing that a little indie game somehow gets Sting, who's never been in a video game before, to act in their game. It's a weird, interesting thing. So that was part of the marketing as well. And then other than that, we did a bunch of just traditional marketing, sort of advertisements and PR placement stuff, and getting into streamers and YouTubers and stuff like that. So all the things that every game does.
Did you actually get to meet Sting?
I didn't. It was sad. He was actually heading out on tour when we needed the audio done, and so he recorded it, I believe, in Italy. He was in Italy at the time, and I sent him the lines, the script, and he did a recording there and sent it back, and we, sent him some notes, and he did pickup lines, and so I never got to meet him face to face, unfortunately, which would have been a lot of fun, but.
It's fun because his song Desert Rose, that music video is all about traveling across the country too. It's just interesting.
Yeah, totally. It's a good fit, I guess. I don't know. He's British, so it's a little weird that he's in this game that's all about America, but it works. He sounds appropriately sinister for the wolf, I think.
Oh, it was very menacing. I had no idea that was Sting. That's awesome.
Yeah, really cool.
So you were talking about Final Fantasy earlier. What are some of the games that you like to play? What's your gaming background?
Yeah. So I really like big, complicated, systemic games, especially Dwarf Fortress. I don't know if you know Dwarf Fortress or not, but it's a weird game about managing a fortress full of dwarves. It's all ASCII. It's all just the dwarves are represented by like little letters or maybe little graphics if you have a patch installed or whatever sort of thing running around. It is like graphically the most simple game you'll ever see, but it will bring your computer to its knees because it simulates all of this stuff down to every level. Like all the dwarves have their own thoughts and opinions and emotions driving them. And it models like if something attacks a dwarf or whatever, it hits them with a sword. Like it figures out like if it hits them on the left arm, like does it just injure their skin or does it go through and injure their flesh or does it like break the bone? Does it cut off the arm? Like it simulates all this stuff for, hundreds of dwarves happening all at the same time, how hungry they are, what kind of food they like to eat, what they dream about at night, what kind of art they make, like all this sort of stuff is all simulated. And so it's a really ridiculously complicated game to play, and it's a lot of fun. So that sort of thing I like. I also like, I've been playing a lot of Breath of the Wild right now. I love big open world games like that. I mean, we talked about Skyrim earlier. I love the whole Elder Scrolls series. I've loved Morrowind back in the day and, played everything since then.
Did you play any on the Elder Scrolls Online at all?
No, I never did. The only MMOs I ever played were I played a lot of Final Fantasy XI.
Oh, that was good, man. Yeah, I remember that.
So, yeah, and there was one other one. What else did I play? I played another MMO. What the heck was it? God, I don't remember. But anyway, yeah, after the experience of having to, I don't know, you have to give up a lot of your life to play an MMO in any sort of serious way. And so I was not as into that. I like single player games where I can, kind of take it at my own pace. Although I like to play things like PUBG also and things like that. Online shooters are fun, competitive stuff.
Have you gotten into the mobile games at all, of the PUBG or Fortnite?
No, I haven't. I haven't even tried them. Like I have a iPhone 5S, so I'm like a little behind the curve in terms of phone stuff. And it probably would run on that, but I have no idea. I haven't tried it. I don't game on my phone a whole lot. I like my computer.
It's
my
tough.
console.
Phone games, man. Not a huge fan, but yeah. Speaking of consoles, so any plans to release? You probably get this question a lot. Any plans on releasing your game to Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, maybe?
Yeah, so we've definitely my background is kind of in console game development, and so consoles were on the radar from the moment we began development of this game, basically. And it's developed with a controller scheme in mind and everything like that. So it's definitely like in the list of plans. It's sort of a just getting the logistics of it worked out is a little tricky, so I don't have any dates or timelines or anything like that, but it's definitely something that we are eager to do.
Yeah, because I was thinking when I was playing it that it would look good and it would be fun on a Nintendo Switch, because it's kind of like a book. You take a book with you wherever you go, pick up the Nintendo Switch, and you just kind of play this great American novel out on the console.
I think it would be a really great fit for the Switch as well, because, you can kind of it's a kind of game where you can pick it up and put it down whenever you want, and there's a lot of, it's not an action sort of game, so you don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. I think it would work really well for the Switch's whole thing.
And it's not an action game, but it's still a game that's like, it's very I don't know if I want to say calming, but it's like you don't feel stressed out when playing it. So that's one of my favorite aspects of it. All right. Before we, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but we have a lot of listeners who are this kind of a thing that we do. We have a lot of listeners who are into like game development. So would you have any tips or advice for any of those people trying to get into that?
So normally I come from a programming background, and what I tell people to start out with when they're making their first games is to copy something else, make something super, super simple, make your version of Breakout or asteroids or Space Invaders or something like that. Like make something really, really simple. I made Pong actually a couple times in different things, because it's a lot harder than you think to just make something like that. And once you have that, you can start doing exciting things with it, right? But a big mistake that I see a lot of people make when they start to make their first games is they're like, and I did this too, honestly, was like, oh, I want to make a giant MMO. This is my idea. I've got this idea for 120 hours of amazing content, and it's going to be this fantasy RPG, and all this whatever, and like, you're just biting off way too much, because finishing even like Pong is going to be really challenging, and it's going to teach you a lot. And once you do that, you can, move on to other stuff. But like, start small, keep things within what you can do, and just build from there, basically, is what I would tell everybody.
It's funny that now that indie game, like creating them is a lot more accessible than it was before. You see a lot of people who do have these grand plans, like, yeah, we're going to make an RPG. It's going to be like Elder Scrolls, but better. But then you sit down and you're like, okay, well, now I understand why they have hundreds of people and it takes 10 years for a game to come out.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool, man. Well, thanks a lot for sitting down and chatting with me about the game. Do you want to plug it at all before we go?
Tell people they can look at it at wherethewatertasteslikewine.com, or find us on Steam and check it out. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool, man. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Well, all right, guys. Well, you will be able to find this interview on iTunes, podcast.com, Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, and all of your usual podcasting outlets. Until next time.
Super BS. Super BS. Yeah. Super BS. Super BS. Yeah.
That's to us people that can feel things. It hurts.